Welcome everyone to the second edition of the Solidarity Sessions. We're very happy to be hosted again in the beautiful market exhibition at the W139. Last time we were all here together, the exhibition was still closed, but now we're really happy to announce that it's open again. You have a little virtual peek into the space, which you can see in front of you, but you can also book a time slot on the W139 website to come for a visit. It's open for another 10 days, so you have a little bit of time to check it out. So my name is Margerita Osipian, and I'm organizing the Solidarity Sessions together with Koen Bartijn and Sepp Eckenhaussen from Platform BK and Nadia Ben-Shagra from the W139. For this session on the issues of housing and studio rental that cultural workers are facing, we've also been working closely with Tatjana Macic from Platform BK and artist Ehsam Fardjadniya. A big thank you in advance to the team of artists at the W139 for once again hosting us and creating this very special live stream experience for everyone watching. So in our first edition of the Solidarity Sessions, we focused on the overall impact of the Corona crisis on cultural workers, independent exhibition spaces, institutions, and the webs of networks around them. For the session tonight, we really want to focus in on the issues around housing and studio rental that are coming up for cultural workers. Many issues that we see today have been amplified by the current crisis. The cracks, the gaps, and the fissures in our systems are being made more visible to more people. But these issues were here before the pandemic. And so we want to look at the systemic power structures in Amsterdam which enable and maintain the broodplaatsen, and touch on the larger power structures and money flows on which the cultural economy operates. We want to ask, how did we get here? It is only by looking at the bigger picture that we can start to understand what we need to do to change. So we call today's Solidarity Session the Vestzak Broekzak edition. Thank you to Nadia from the W139 for, for this nice Dutch term, which refers to an economic strategy in which costs or profits appear to move out of an organization, but are really just shifted around within different levels of that organization. So you're moving money from your vest pocket to your pants pocket, but it still stays with you. So in March of this year, Platform BK, together with Kunst en Band, published a report called Geen Stad zonder Kunst, so No City Without Art, which was a reflection on a series of 6 collective conversations that took place in the spring of 2019 in 6 cities throughout the Netherlands. The conversation brought together artists, politicians, civil servants, studio organizations, and other interested parties. The reason for and importance of these conversations is the tendency that had been cropping up for living and working space for artists to become increasingly scarce and expensive, and for contracts to become increasingly flexible and of shorter duration. In Amsterdam, a lot of properties are owned by the municipality, which is also the only municipality with a municipal service that is responsible for the realization of workshops and incubators. And it's called the Bureau Broodplaatsen. The municipality increased the budget with the new policy period from 2 million to 3.5 million per year. But while the budget has increased, Platform BK still predicts that there will be less availability of affordable studio and living space in the future. This is because the government can't prevent or is not doing enough to keep the prices of real estate from rising every year. Due to gentrification and the competitive market, the price of land rises every year so that the government can't keep their real estate to themselves, and the real estate they do have needs to be rented out in a cost-effective way. Which might have to do with certain debts that the municipality claims to have. So this results in the government only focusing on short-term housing and studios and not on permanent housing and studios, which leads to less space in the end. So to sum it all up, gentrification and the competitive real estate market in Amsterdam ensures high prices. And in addition, both the municipality and housing corporations sell real estate that they previously would rent out under social conditions. On top of that, broodplaatsen that have been realized in the past are disappearing because the lease term expires on those buildings. It's also become increasingly difficult to create new broodplaatsen. Municipal real estate must be rented out to cover costs. Housing corporations may no longer develop broodplaatsen, and property owners are not inclined to offer their real estate at a social rental price. Due to the lack of suitable properties, only smaller properties are now being realized for shorter periods at higher prices. Because of the introduction of these market forces inside of public services and governments, less social real estate is available, and what is still being rented follows market prices and is much more expensive. Jerome Kruijvel from Platform BK, he was interviewed about the report, and he said, in other words, due to the primacy of market, which puts financial value above social value, municipalities have lost a lot of strength to realize social facilities while they have been made responsible for it. End quote. So what we really see in Amsterdam is the complexity of these issues and how they are entangled and hidden within one another and within these kinds of bureaucratic mazes. It makes it very hard, I think, for like people like me and for a lot of us to really try to understand how do these systems actually function. And a lot of what I said above was from a report that Platform BK had put out. And it really helped me to also try to understand like what is actually happening within these systems. So we hope that in the sharing of stories, advice, and expertise tonight, we can all move towards a better understanding for how we can make change and what rights we really have within these systems. So a little bit about like how the evening will unfold. So we're gonna begin with updates that have occurred since our last solidarity sessions, which happened in May. Then we're gonna move on to a section about listening to tenants in troubled, followed by a conversation that makes us think beyond just cultural workers. Then we'll have our listening to experts session to discuss people's rights, the power structures of the cultural economy, and advocacy and support organizations. And finally, we'll be hearing from people and organizations that have more communal and socially focused organizing structures and principles, especially self-owned practices. And then we'll end with a question and answer period where we're going to invite you, the audience, to ask questions. So if you have any questions that come up while you're listening to people speak, just send them through in the chat and we'll be collecting them as the night goes along and then answering them during the question and answer period. So as I mentioned, we want to start tonight's session with a few updates on things that have happened since our last session in May. And we've invited 3 speakers to give up these updates about their own situations and the situations of organizations that they present. So the first speaker that I want to introduce is a visual artist, filmmaker, and activist, Ehsam Fardjadniya. Ehsam has been vlogging about his own situation with housing and eviction, as well as creating videos about the precarious situation that many cultural workers are finding themselves in, particularly during the pandemic. Ehsam spoke during our first solidarity session in May, and I'd like to invite him to give us a quick update on his own situation and also an update on a motion that was passed in relation to housing rights in the municipality that he worked on together with a group of tenants as part of BUT. Welcome, Ehsam.
Hi, thank you, Margerita. Yes, so I just want to quickly talk about what happened to me. I was in the contract with Zwerfkei Anti-Kraak Bureau that I was basically getting houses from them since many years. And the reason why it was because the Broedplaatsen was always too expensive for me. The rent was usually more than 50% of my income, so I could not afford it. And this idea of having a second job to just pay my rent was not something that I could accept. So from lack of choice, actually, I had to live with this kind of super precarious contracts. And this situation came to a kind of a crisis when actually the corona crisis came to Amsterdam, because already in February I got a letter of eviction with no guarantee, because this kind of contracts, they don't guarantee anything to provide anything afterwards. So basically they can just put you on the street with 1 month notice. So then they notify me that by end of February I will be evicted and there would be no chances for a new house for me. And I emailed them saying, but now it is a pandemic. You cannot evict anyone during the pandemic. And they said basically they can't help. I emailed them the house owner, which was Eckenhaussen, and they said they can't help. I emailed Gemeente, and I received a phone call from shelters, and they said the shelters are full right now. We cannot help you. So in that moment, I decided to speak up in the format of blogging, and I started sending the blogs and basically asking for help because in that moment the corona was just coming to the city, and I couldn't see myself being evicted and having to like sleep in somebody else's couch. It was not responsible. So and uh, and and the vlogs start picking up. There was many attentions for that from friends who start writing to um, to the House Corporation, and also from organizations and also politicians that they are in the gemeente Amsterdam. Um, so but none of that really worked till the article was published on the Monitor, because then they covered my story, and then they asked the housing corporation Eichenhard how they could put someone on the street during the pandemic, and of course that would have been a very bad publicity for them. So they said that basically they will give me 1 month extra. Um, but then to make it very short, this fight was going on from February till July, and each time I was getting 1 month um, extension on the eviction. It was extremely a stressful moment, but at the same time, it was a good moment for me to speak out, to say what is going on, and to talk about the system of precarity that many of cultural workers are facing right now. There a huge amount of people. I read somewhere about 50,000 people who are living anti-squat, who are signing for their own eviction and signing for to give away all of the rights that they have. And so it is not only me. I spoke out, but many of those people they don't dare to speak out because they think they would lose uh, the little thing that they have with anti-corrupt. Because if they don't receive other houses because they spoke out, then that means that they have to go to either commercial market or broodplaatsen, which is too expensive, so they can't afford it. That's one of the reasons why they don't speak out. But I decided to speak out, and I was also encouraged by the Bond Precaire Wonen to actually speak out. I was in close collaboration. Abel helped me a lot with the group of solidarities that they are organizing to actually encourage me to speak out, because they said if you don't put your fist on the table, they would just ignore you. And in the moment that you do that, then they will come and speak to you. And that is actually what happened when my story started becoming more viral, and journalists start writing about it. So I just wanted, in the spirit of the moment that we are in with Black Rights movement and Black Lives Matter, I just wanted to say a quote from Zora Hurson that says, "If you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say that you enjoyed it." Um, Moving from this situation, to conclude this, right now, after 10 years of living in Amsterdam and 20 years of living in Netherlands, this is the first good contract that I got. I got moved out of anti-crack system after about 9 years of living for them, the best way to put it. And for the first time, I received a very good contract with affordable house, and that is also because of the solidarity sessions. Because Nadia actually introduced me. She got to know about my story, and she introduced me to opportunity that was coming up. And because of other friends and people that I know, they got to know about my situation. They also advised this house group that I'm living with to actually accept me because my situation was very precarious. So it means really something to speak out. It means really something to dare to go public with your story. Although I know that there would be stigmatizations about your story, but you have to overcome that and just speak out about your situation. Um, that was my experience, and from at the same time, during this struggle against the anti-squat situation, something that I like to say, these contracts have to be gone. Like, we understand during this pandemic how important it is to have a house, to have a shelter, and uh, and and I think this kind of very temporary contract that takes out all the rights of the tenants and don't even see these people as tenants have to be eradicated, has to be gone. This is semi-illegal kind of gray zone contracts that are very abusive. So that would be my work. um, and in between, we worked also on a motion that is a letter to the gemeente of Amsterdam about the broedplaatsen. The motion is a letter that requested official response from the council about the situation of the artists living in the broedplaatsen. This motion was actually kind of motivated by AIM. They asked us to write it, to collaborate with them to write it together. And we did that as a BOT organization, Broedplaatsen United Tenants. And because we also communicate this letter directly with the councillor, Turia Meliani, she actually responded to this motion letter with a letter that we also published on the platform BOT. And there is few really important points that I just made as a bullet point. I wanted to remind you of that because I think for many tenants who are living in the broedplaats, and this is quite important to know right now. And this letter, again, you can find it on the website of BOT. So it says basically that everyone who is renting from the municipality property will not be sent a reminder for their rent delay or exhortation. There would be no debt collection, um, more additional support for tenants would come, and the rent increase is canceled, and they are working on the tailor-made packages for the tenants depending on their situation. So that could mean a partial remission of rent. That could mean also multi-year payment schemes, sorry. It could also mean interest-free loan. Yeah, that's it actually. These are the that I think for people who are in the broedplaats and contracts and have difficulties with paying their rent, it's very important thing to know. And we have also received some tenants that they were worried about their situation, and they actually used this letter to reply to the organization who is running the broedplaats.
Thank you so much, Ehsam, for that really nice summary of the main points and what rights people have now. And we're also really happy to hear that you have like a more stable home. Also my neighbor now, which is really nice. Yes. Thank you. So our next speaker also was with us during the last solidarity sessions. It's Julia Sokolnicka, who's an experimental and documentary filmmaker, writer, and researcher. And she has been living and working in the broedplaats Lely space. In the introduction, I talked a little bit about the report that was put out by Platform BK, where they gave the example of broedplaats Lely as one of these situations where the municipality invests in a property that is only operating by its original intentions for a short period of time. So the municipality invested an additional 1.1 million in 2017 to create 42 living / working spaces and 21 studio spaces at broedplaats Lely. but then they're only going to be rented out until December 2020, so the end of this year. And then after this moment, that space will become free sector housing and offices. So I think in this example with Broodplaats Leeuwen, you can really see this kind of short-term thinking. It's really great to have you here, Julia. Maybe you can give us a bit of an update since in the last month, maybe for your own situation, and if you have any updates about the situation at Leeuwen.
Hi. Yes, sure. Maybe I will start with like kind of acknowledging what you just said about the temporarity of this project. It really does feel very strongly so in the recent time. We did actually have a prolonging already. We were supposed to be here only until the end of the last year of like, so we already are in one extended year. And we are very much hoping actually to stay here longer, because it doesn't seem like there's any other cultural space in the area, and we really feel like a little bit of an island. But yeah, that is kind of like a hope for the future. And also to just like refer to what Ehsam was saying, that it would be possible for him to go and live in the Broodplaats. It's also wouldn't necessarily be the case, because to actually live in the Broodplaats is not that common thing. There aren't so many Broodplaatses in Amsterdam that are livable spaces, and ever since I started being public as a tenant at Leeuwen, all my friends are texting me almost every day asking if there's a free space to stay at Leeuwen, because the housing crisis in Amsterdam is still very much real. So what I wanted to say is that for the first time in this corona crisis, now 3 months in it, it feels like Leeuwen is a community, because the consequence of this space being temporary is also that there isn't much investment being done by the administrator of the building into actually creating a community. It is being called as a community. Our portfolios are on the website of our landlord, or actually not the landlord is the gemeente, but the coordinator or the middleman, the administrator, urban resort. But it doesn't really come with like a investment package. So every activity that is done in the building by the artist living in the building is done by the cost of the artist. So we are the ones who are actually making programming from our own pocket. If there is anything happening in the building, it's happening because of us. There is actually a case of a gallery at 7, which was very active for almost 2 years, and they didn't receive funding to continue. They were operating through the tenants. They were the only tenants-based initiative that was active in the building, and they were doing great. They had a great program, and there was a lot of people coming to see the shows there, and they just couldn't make it anymore. And 2 of the people who were running the space left to Rotterdam, leaving Amsterdam behind, because literally their work for the community and for the space was not recognized. And that's still a huge gap. In my little heart, I'm still weeping, because it was really the nicest way of really being with people. They held the space in a way that I would think art spaces should be holding space. It wasn't just popping in for a wine. It was like really a long time, many hours long program. So this is what I wanted to say, that it feels really good, actually, oddly enough, to be in the corona times, because finally we have time to hang out together and to bond. And for the first time, we know who lives in the building, who we know each other's names. We started doing bonfires behind the house. We are like doing gardening, and we have a compost. It feels very silly, but I think it is the core of what a community should be. And it all happened because we had time to do it. But then, of course, the time comes with a certain cost. And maybe to say a little bit about my situation, I actually also started seeing how really strange my life is, how difficult it was for me to hold on to my super tiny earnings, and how much of juggling and acrobatics that was to really make my living. I think the platform Precaire report said that on average artists are making 1,600 a month. Like, not really the case. I don't know, maybe it's a little bit lower, it's a little bit hired by people over 50, or I don't know. I don't know where those numbers comes from. All people I know are making less than like 1,400 maybe in a good month, but usually it's more about 1,800. Yeah. And then also when you're talking about having a rent job, a job which is specifically held to pay your rent, like I never knew any difference, because I never was, maybe you can only do another lifestyle when you are privileged or happy enough or lucky enough to have a scholarship, which also, of course, we know in the Netherlands it is quite possible to get one, but you don't really go on for years having a scholarship. You usually have a scholarship for a year, and then you fall out back to the so-called free market, which definitely will not give you more than 1,500 a month, roughly. Now having a Tozo scheme, I am falling behind with my payments, and it feels very sad that I have to stop paying my rent finally, because I actually got a little bit scared of not paying the rent, being well, maybe saying a little bit about my situation. I'm an expat. I just started learning Dutch recently. I'm not very hireable, I guess, in like other market than art market, which stopped existing in a way. So I am only now surviving on Tozo. I have no other sources of income, which means that with my rent, which is like 630 a month, I don't have enough money to survive. So because I am also an expat, my house, which is my studio, is my only legal bonding to this country. If I lose my house, I'm losing my insurance, I'm losing my company, like my address, my everything. I cannot go homeless. So because I was vocal about the tenants' rights, I actually got a little bit paranoid that if I stop paying the rent, I might become a scapegoat. I mean, maybe it was my, I just got a little bit scared that I shouldn't put myself in this position. I discussed it a lot with my friends. Maybe I shouldn't have been afraid of it, but it was just my intuition. I don't want to go behind. But actually this month I will, because I have no other choice. And that feels, well, I feel now empowered enough through all that has been happening to do it, but it also doesn't feel like something that an adult person should do. And I feel very much intimidated by, well, our landlord has been actually calling us and pushing us to pay the rent no matter what. Now the situation has changed a little bit because of the Broodplaats and United Tenants movements that I've been also kind of part of together with Ehsam and Rosa de Velde and a bunch of other people from different Broodplaats. It resulted in a chance of the additional money that comes, the steunpakket and all the additional money that is coming the way of the Broodplaatsen to actually be donated or given to the tenants. And before I wasn't really, like, I didn't really have much trust in how this money would be spent, because Broodplaatses, like I actually also was before a tenant at WOW, and all my experiences with this weird living working structure is that there is, of course, some subsidies coming, but it rarely ends up with the tenants. And every time I was asked to do something for the Broodplaats, maybe for one exception in WOW, was for free. And then my name and my work was on the website, or it was advertising the event. It wasn't ever like really paid. And I had a strong feeling that if things have gone that bad for so many years, it could be a case that the Broodplaats decides to, for example, give the money to us for work, or, you know, I was not really trustworthy. I didn't really trust that this was spent well. And that's why I also went on working with Rosa and with Ehsam and with other people who shared this distrust to make sure that we can influence, we can actually push for more transparency in order to well, work with our landlord, with our administration to actually have a seat at the table, and when we're talking money, and when we're talking like permissions to stay, and when we're talking evictions, when we were talking all those things. And it wasn't successful actually until we started being vocal online, and before, like, we used Ehsam's super method of just being pretty loud about it, and like really tagging people, and just being quite maybe yeah, like over the top sometimes even, but like just not really confronting urban resort with, like, guys, you're not working in our best interest, and you really have to explain yourselves. So that's pretty much the arc of our adventures.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's also great to hear like positive stories about how the crisis also brings people together in a lot of ways. People that might have just been sort of like working next to each other in a space now feel empowered in different ways. And we'll also touch back on some things you mentioned also about your immigration status, for example, and how it could also make you feel not so empowered. So what rights do you have in that context? And we'll touch on that later in our sessions. So the last speaker in this section is Sepp Eckenhaussen, who's the co-director of Platform BK. And he's going to give us an update on the current situation with negotiations that they're having together with Urban Resort. So welcome, Sepp.
Thank you, Margerita. So I'll continue a little update about what is going on at Urban Resort, since after reading the letter that Kunstebond and Platform BK sent to the government asking for rent relief, Urban Resort reached out to us and to ask if our organizations can think along with the crisis management and the lobbying that they're doing. And so just very briefly, for those who don't know, Urban Resort is an organization that's operating in Amsterdam and managing around 20 large properties, renting out units to cultural workers and organizations. And these then include, for instance, the Leeuwen, but also Volkshandgebouw and many others. So when we were asked, it was kind of self-evident to Platform BK and Kunstebond that if we were to have these conversations with Urban Resort about tenants, about artist spaces, we should also include the tenants and talk to the artists. And it just so happens that the tenants had already been gathering, as you just heard from Julia, and had already established Broedplaats United Tenants, but also started talking different constellations, and had started up a conversation with Urban Resort themselves. So actually quite naturally, these conversations between Urban Resort and us, and between the tenants and Urban Resort, kind of combined into one big conversation. And over the course of the past few weeks, we've been having group video calls with the tenants of several Broedplaats, Urban Resort management, Kunstebond, and Platform BK. And while the interests of renters and managing organizations like Urban Resort do differ at points, they also share one big interest, which is to maintain social property, because an organization like that cannot exist without it, and of course artists are dependent upon it for their practice. So based on that understanding, there's now a tenants committee in establishment, which is working on several issues. They're asking, what is a tenants committee? How does it work? And what is even the proper name for it? It's really inventing as they're going. How can a committee on the long run be turned into a tenants association? Also, invited by Urban Resort, the question, provided that there will be crisis funds available from any source, how should they be used and distributed? And there's a conversation going on with Urban Resort. How can there be written down payment agreements in which it is ensured that if there is possible future emergency funds, how they can be used to decrease the financial pressure on the tenants that are already in the precarious situations. So, I mean, that's kind of what's going on now, and it's much too soon to really draw conclusions on what happens or evaluate the process, but there are some general takeaways that I see already. which is, for instance, that self-organized spaces are great and we need more of them, but it's not for everyone to want or to be able to self-organize everything. So it's great that managing organizations like Urban Resort exist, but it's also very clear from this case that it remains very important that renters have a clear and institutionally acknowledged voice in the governance of the property that they rent. Also clear in this example is that if it didn't happen before, now is a great time to organize and to start connecting to each other, but also beyond that to join networks of renters organizations. And it really helps to talk with BAT, with Kunstebond, with Bond Precaire Woonvormen, with others, maybe with us. And people should know that they're always very welcome to come to, I think, any of these organizations with their questions. And then the last thing is that we see that there's quite a bit of fear amongst tenants of Broedplaats to speak up about their problems. And that's, of course, understandable. And it is true, I think, that it's good to think about what you're going to say before you say it in public. But you can always speak up in the knowledge that if your landlord takes their job as managing social real estate seriously, they also see the necessity of having an open conversation. And then, of course, the governments and the politicians, and in the end, the citizens to whom these properties often belong, will also value these conversations and expect them to take place. So, yeah, please do feel free to speak up. And if you want to know how or why, or in which constellation, also feel free to always contact us and we'll be there. Thanks.
Sorry, okay, unmuted. For our next section, I think you're gonna do a little switch and bring Koen Bartijn in to sort of take over from me for a little bit, and then I'll hop back in. Hey, Koen, welcome.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sepp, for this elaboration of the situation in Urban Resort. It really is an example how collective effort of a bottom-up can really change something about the situation of tenants, and also that we already heard positive stories about Julia and Ehsam, that their situation really changed. I think since the last solidarity sessions really shows us the urgencies of this meeting, and thank you again for your stories. Okay, now in this part we invited two tenants, namely Andrea Guterres, who is currently working and living in the building of WOW in the so-called Koninklijkbuurt, and Sjoerd van Oevelen, who lives in Loods, a cultural stronghold on the KNSM island. We will first start with Sjoerd. And Sjoerd is a visual artist who studied at the Rietveld Academy and Architectural Association in London. Sjoerd, you rent a studio in Loods, the cultural stronghold on the KNSM island in Amsterdam Oost. It's already there since 1987. I think it was formerly squatted. Sjoerd is the chairman of the Loods community, who are currently fighting against a really bizarre corporate coup d'etat from Housing Corporation De Kai. Sjoerd, please tell us about your very precarious situation, and we really should call it fraud of De Kai, and what we all can do in solidarity to your situation. So please tell us.
Thank you for inviting me tonight and hearing all these stories. There's a sense of course, of precarity that was already existing, but it's all confirmed. Even the good news of the urban resort, how it will maybe develop, is a very small drip. Anyway, the Loods community. Loods is a very big building. It's one of the oldest cultural hotspots in Amsterdam. It's also a very strange combination. It has 60 studio spaces and workshops. It has around 40 creative spaces. So these are more or less designers, architects, some communication bureaus, and then there are around 15 shops. So the building is huge. It's 20 24,000 square meters big. There are plus 300 people working in the building. The precariousness is, as you said, so that the guy became the only director in the foundation, which is actually the owner of the building. And that that seemed a very good idea a long time ago, but the corporations changed, and also they used to be very social and their ambitions were to serve the public interest, but that's a long time ago, and now they serve other interests. And yeah, especially the guy is a corporation which only focuses on young people with flex contracts. That means that everything which is in their portfolio, like the Loods says, they try to sell it, or they try to take money of it and use it for their own purposes to build housing. And housing is a very good thing to do in Amsterdam, since there is a lack of housing. But the way they try to do it is really yeah, trying to find all the loopholes possible to get what they want. So for the Loods community, that means that we are already fighting for more than 2 years. Well, we try to fight it off, and in the last few weeks there was a lot of publicity about our case. Yeah, what can I say? We're still in the middle of it, and yeah, maybe what's good to know, because there's many talks about new places in Amsterdam, and also they have leases which are very short. For example, like urban resort, they have, it's not their fault that they have short leases. It's the ground policy in Amsterdam with all the investors, which make it a very tough market to find space which is long term. Loods is one of these places which was supposed to be long term, and we're probably now falling back into a situation where we don't know anymore where we end up. The Loods the structure of it internally is maybe interesting to say. It has 3 levels of rent, so the amounts of rent. So for the artists, it's around 60 euros or so a square meter a year. So that's an average studio rent, you could say. I think Urban Resort will also charge you more or less this amount. And then there are like these creative spaces which go much higher, around 150 euros until 200 euros even. And then there are these shops, they are a little bit in between. But what I want to say, from a long time ago, the rent which is collected each month altogether makes it go round. So we have never had subsidies. It was not necessary. We just do without it. And that was actually a great eye-opener for the municipality itself when we got established. Because at that moment, so that's the beginning of the 90s, the broedplaatsbeleid was just non-existent. And when it got off, they took the model of the Loods 6 as a model to found broedplaatsen which have these different levels of rents. And that's also how Urban Resort works, actually. So you could say we are like a proto broedplaats up there. I don't know, I can continue forever, but yeah, maybe that's for now, I think, enough. We are since we are with so many, that means that we are also strong. Strong in a way that it is very precarious, but just to push 300 people out of a building, that's a very tough thing to do. But still we feel very vulnerable. And even if we are not the youngest community, we have a lot of ideas how we would like to cater for the city of Amsterdam. There are so many possibilities with the building, and with maybe our resources, if we could get to them, that we could really fund others in the city who really are in need of money and possibilities. We would like to provide it. It's not that we are Santa Claus or so, but I mean, the thing is that if the building would be in our hands, so to say, we would make definitely totally different decisions than what the guy wants to do with it. So what we try to do is, with lawyers and with a lot of talking, try to get them out of talk them out of it, and say this is not the way how you deal with your social with this social building. It was given by the gemeente, by the municipality. The lease was very low for the purpose of cultural output, and you can't just take that away from Amsterdam and from us. So.
Thank you, Sjoerd. Yes, and I also heard that the money that you raised in the building previously went to, or maybe still went to the artists to keep the rents low and to organize cultural events. And now the Kai also appropriated your savings.
It is still there. Yeah. There's 13 million euros on our account.
Mm-hmm.
That's so much money. It should be invested in culture and not
exactly. Yeah. And I also heard that you have a petition. And
yes. Yeah, you were already saying so. We call it "Stop the Million Fraud of the Guy." It's a bit harsh, but it's a thing they want in 25 years. They want to get out. They want to make 60 to 80 million euro from us, and that's only rent. So that's only rent money. Mm-hmm. And so therefore we started a petition, Stop the Million Fraud of the Guy. You can find it at petities.nl. We started 2 weeks ago. We have now around 3,000 signings. So that's really very good. And we got also a lot of response. People are signing up as friends of Loods. We have also a campaign going on with a lot of sharks who eat the building like a Pac-Man. So we're also doing this kind. This well, it's not a fun thing, but we have to make ourselves clear, right? That it can't be like this.
Yes,
it should stop. So hopefully you can find the petition and sign it as well, or others. That
we will share the petition in the comment section on the YouTube channel. So I'll call to all the viewers to sign it, and I hope, Sjoerd, that you will able to find enough support to keep the building and stop the takeover, and we will do everything to help you in solidarity, of course.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, our next participant is a tenant from WOW. Her name is Andrea Guterres. She's currently working and living in the building of WOW in Amsterdam West in the so-called Kolenkitbuurt. WOW calls itself a comfortable hostel for urban explorers and a springboard and temporary home for recently graduated artists. Here presents another hip temporary project, but worse, it's not so much a warm home for the tenants as they present to be. Andrea will tell us more. Andrea is an Australian musician working in the field of electroacoustic composition and multimedia sound design. She moved to the Netherlands in 2018 to do a master's degree on the Conservatorium van Amsterdam, and has been living in WOW for over a year now. Andrea will speak on behalf of the residents of WOW, who together prepared a statement about the troublesome situation in their residency building. So here's to you, Andrea.
Thank you for having us here at the Solidarity session. The WOW tenants are all very happy to have this opportunity to share our experiences with other Broodplaatsen and members of the artistic community. So first, I guess I'll start with a basic information about WOW. It's part of the Broodplaats Association, and as such, tenants apply for CAWA in order to be accepted, and we're expected to take part in cultural activities. However, WOW is simultaneously a stichting and a hotel business. artists share the building with hostel guests on separate floors, and the two artist floors share facilities with one another. Approximately 25 artists share kitchen and bathroom facilities at any one time. Both the hostel and artist residency are run by hotelier Sandra Shetty, with Macic Putman Kramer acting as manager or landlord. Our contracts are a maximum of 2 years, and the rent is approximately 12 euros per square meter, with an additional flat rate of 110 euros of service fees. So now that I've briefly given an overview of WOW, I'd like to bring up some isolated concerns and incidents that the artists at WOW have experienced in regards to the particular power dynamics between WOW management team and its tenants. And I hope this will bring light to the larger power structure between artists, councils, and property managers. So this is a collection of opinions and stories from multiple artists in residence here at WOW. So what I'm about to address represents the whole artistic community at WOW and not just my own experiences. Of course, these issues are long-standing and they didn't just start after the coronavirus crisis, but I will explain how some of them were exacerbated after the coronavirus crisis, mostly triggered by, I would say, a poor management system at WOW, one that is we are now finding quite toxic, actually. So to elaborate on that, I'll just start by saying that there's no clear understanding as to how we participate in cultural activities at WOW, and many tenants even feel that they are treated with suspicion by the hostel staff. We are touted as artists in residence on their website, giving us the impression that we are part of their business model, and yet our proposals for artistic initiatives are routinely ignored. When we have inquired further about the situation, we have been given little answer as to how WOW works or our role in the space. And the first dispute that we had with WOW over a complete lack of transparency was in regards to our 110 euros a month of service fees, which don't even include the internet. So repeated attempts by tenants for answers on transparency on where our service fees actually go were ignored. Routine cleaning of the floors by WOW, which is mandated in the contract, didn't happen for several months. And when tenants inquired as to how much of these fees go towards the contract mandated cleaning, this simple request for transparency was ignored. And furthermore, more recently, when a legal team who represented WOW tenants inquired about service fee transparency, the acting landlord, Macic Putman Kramer, falsely told them that receiving such transparency would be equivalent to dissolving our contract. On this topic of money, we have received information from the gemeente that incasso or debt collection will not be enforced during the coronavirus crisis against WOW for missed rent, which goes in alignment with the Broodplaats Association statement to not send debt collectors out at this time for tenants living in these sorts of housings. However, we have residents that have been personally threatened with debt collectors by WOW's landlord representative, Macic Putman Kramer, since the coronavirus crisis. And moreover, the WOW management team has routinely lied to us about not receiving any income from their hostel at this time, when they are currently renting an entire floor of the hostel to the gemeente, which is full of tenants. So as you can sort of see the power dynamics between WOW, its management team, and especially its business owner, Sandra Shetty, are becoming increasingly intimidating for artists at WOW. For the past month, even, Sandra Shetty has been moving a friend of hers into a floor of the building that is specifically reserved for artists, even though there is at least one other floor of the hostel that is empty. And while this isn't inherently a problem for us, there was an incident between an artist in residence and this new tenant over a noise complaint at 4 a.m., which resulted in the artist in question being threatened. The acting landlord, Macic Putman Kramer, refused to give a direct answer as to the identity of this new tenant, with whom we are now sharing facilities. Furthermore, before the building's hostel capacity was significantly reduced due to coronavirus restrictions, there were several incidents of their way into the living space of the artists in residence. So these young tourists were often under the influence of drugs or alcohol and appeared in our hallways or kitchens late in the night or early in the morning. There was even one incident of a particularly drunk hostel guest entering a tenant's bedroom while she was asleep and laying next to her in her bed. He was a large male and difficult for the tenant to remove from her bedroom. There have been no attempts by the WOW management staff to address these issues of basic security and home invasion by their hostel guests, even when the problem was brought up with them. So as a result, we get the impression that hostel revenue comes before our safety and well-being as tenants. We also have one other incident of the business owner, Sandra Shetty, entering a tenant's room uninvited, where she proceeded to take a photo without permission and subsequently threatened the tenant with a fine for breaking house rules. So tenants now feel afraid that staff will appear unannounced at their door and harass them. And this has actually happened on more than one occasion since the coronavirus crisis, when tenants have had difficulty making the rent on time. As a result, the living environment feels hostile. A meeting proposed by tenants to discuss rent debt during the coronavirus crisis was cancelled by the WOW management team with no plans for rescheduling after tenants inquired about other issues such as transparency over cultural activities, service fees, and who we are even sharing the building with. Tenants' concerns about basic hygiene, living arrangements, and even their safety are ignored. All of this has left tenants feeling like there is a basic lack of understanding coming from Stichting WOW, especially during the coronavirus crisis. Many of the tenants at WOW are non-EU citizens, have no rights to social benefits, are unable to go home right now, and were left with no income and no support network after the coronavirus crisis hit Europe. Attempts by tenants to approach the problem of missed rent payments collectively have been shut down by WOW management team, who continuously insist that they will only deal with us individually and not as a group. However, while some tenants have been told that they must pay the rent in full at a later date, others in similar financial situations have already been threatened by debt collectors for not paying the rent immediately. This leaves us with the feeling that WOW is not willing to provide transparency on their individual arrangements with tenants because they are looking for a solution with the most monetary gain, and not because they feel the problem can be approached better by implementing individual payment plans. And to conclude, overall, we get the impression that WOW operates primarily as a hostel and business, and not as a cultural landscape between management and tenants. The environment is becoming increasingly hostile. We out to
Thank you, Andrea. I'm not sure if my connection is bad or yours. Yeah, thank you for your bravery and to tell your story. It sounds like an amazingly difficult situation. We should really get your story out in the open and make also the people at the municipality aware how their money is being misused at the moment, and what a hostile and unsafe situation is created for you and your co-tenants in WOW. We in the next hour we will also listen to other experts from lawyer offices and from Bond Precaire Wonen who know what you can do as a collective in order to overcome this hostile situation. And yeah, we all should stay in contact and think about what collective efforts may do to create a better situation for you all. But before we do that, we go over to Margerita again, and she will introduce two other speakers, which is a shout out to more solidarity that goes beyond cultural workers and speaks about refugees as well. So here's Margerita again.
Hi, Thank you, Koen. Yeah, so as you mentioned, in the last solidarity sessions, we also highlighted the importance of thinking beyond their own spheres, so beyond just the impact of the crisis on cultural workers and the cultural economy, because the right to affordable and safe housing should be a right that we all have, regardless of our legal or immigration status in a country. We want to stress the importance of standing in solidarity with others that are also facing precarious situations for housing, and thinking together about how we can support one another. And so I'm very happy to welcome Alhady and Elke Uitenhuis, both here representing themselves as part of the struggle for basic rights by refugee collective Wij zijn hier, we are here in English. Welcome Alhady and Elke.
Yeah, thank you. How are you? Yeah, we are here to talk a little bit about the very precarious situation that people from We Are Here are in at the very moment. Just before the corona crisis, squatting was kind of banned in Amsterdam. Which was always the way that We Are Here created self-organized shelters for undocumented refugees, and now is no longer allowed. So that means that a lot of people came on the street and before the corona crisis started, and now due to the corona crisis, Alhady is one of the guys who's now in the emergency night shelter. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about
shelter.
Yeah, about the shelter, how it looks like, where it is, how it looks like.
Yeah, this shelter in Amsterdam, Zuid. It's a sport hall in Zuid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are living like 80%.
80%?
Yeah, like 2 bed, one place like 45. The one also.
Yeah, in the sport hall.
In the sport hall in Zuid.
Yeah, and you have there are two big spaces with 40 people in it each.
Yeah, it's 2 places.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are living.
And do you have your own room or your own space?
No, I don't have any room. This is I have 2 meters. Like one table. I have one table and my bed and my chair. This is my room.
Yeah.
And also my neighbor also is big place.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, their rooms are with tape on the ground. They have it's defined where their space is. And yeah, they stay in a shelter with 40 people in a sport hall already for months now. There is there are strict regulations, of course. What time? Because it's only night shelter.
Yeah, just it's open 4:30, and then 10 o'clock in the morning is closed. You can go out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not 24 hours. You can live inside.
No. Yeah. So it's only in the night, and then during the day they need to be on the street. And also you need to be in every night before 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before 10 you need to be inside.
Yeah.
You don't come after 10 o'clock. It's not go inside. You can go sleep out in the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's since last week they also implemented a new rule. It's that you cannot stay for more than one night per week outside. And they didn't communicate this with the users of the shelter. So some people stayed out more nights, and they're now kicked out of the emergency shelter and are on the street. 5 people till so far.
Abel.
Oh. Yeah. So and the situation is that they are now talking about closing the emergency shelters. probably on the 1st of August. But it means that a lot of people will be on the street again.
Yeah, maybe last week, last 2 weeks is closed.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's going. Let's see where it's going open.
Yeah.
You know.
And during the Corona crisis, I think it was also very scary, because like everybody was told to be like in quarantine, to stay home. But
it's like 24 hours you can stay.
Yeah, and you stayed in a space with so many people, using the same toilet, the same shower.
Just 2 toilet and 2 like shower for 45 people. This is not good.
No.
It's not safe. Also, this time for Corona, we need something safe. Like we need room alone. We need house.
Yeah. And also the fact that there is like there's no privacy and there's security guards like overwatching the whole.
Yeah, this is in morning. Security also. You don't wake you respect. Sometimes you sleep like push your butt, wake like this.
Yeah.
Sometimes from 7 o'clock you wake, and then where you go?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, in the morning before also you don't allow you take breakfast inside. You take your breakfast, you take your coffee or tea, you go eat outside. Also, you stay outside. It's many people. Also, security. Sometimes police also come. Nobody stay. You can go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very hostile environment, and this is happening in Amsterdam, and it's and it also doesn't look like there's 24-hour shelter. Our municipality promised this, but they don't have there's not enough place. Like Alhady is already in the waiting list for 7 months.
Yeah, from September.
Yeah. And so there are still many people on the street, and because the squatting is banned, like we are like facing like they are now in this situation, which is really shitty. There are some people living, staying, sleeping in the Nelson Mandela Park in the Bijlmer. The situation is really, really bad. Yeah. So sometimes we feel a bit desperate, but we really need you to stand with us, and to stand with all undocumented refugees in these times more than ever. So we would like to call you to do a call out to all be present on the demonstrations that are going to be organized for the World Refugee Day on the 20th of June. Because now there's like a big wave of Black Lives Matter demonstrations, which is fantastic. But the Black lives of these men are more violated than any other Black life in the Netherlands. So we should stand with them very much.
And is there anything else? We've just so everyone knows, we shared the link for the Solidarity event that's going to be on the 20th of June. And is there anything else we can do if people are thinking like, how can I help? Are there maybe political parties that are actually thinking about kind of closing this asylum gap that has led to the situation of a lot of the people that are in Bijzijn hier, maybe donate? Are there a few other things that we could think about doing?
Yeah, well, vote bijeen. That would be helpful. Because they are the only part who are really like working hard on specifically this subject matters and do not compromise. And yeah, donating, I don't think that is the most necessary right now. I think most necessary is now stand in solidarity and like and go to all the Black Lives Matter protest and then yeah, and give space for this group again, like in a yeah, like that's mainly it. Like because yeah, we need to stop this violation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like a new place.
Newland.
Which place you?
Well, like I say, like you, like just be in solidarity and join the protest. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other suggestions? What people can do?
I don't know what people can do.
No. Vote differently.
Yeah, you can do nothing because you don't have anything. Because you wake in the morning, you go out, and then you come back. Yeah. All night you in the street. What do you think? What do you want to do? Yeah. Don't do nothing.
Yeah.
Just you need like place you need to stay. And then yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's seems like a really yeah, difficult situation that you might feel really stuck in it. But we're gonna also have hope, I think, for the situation to see what we can do. And we're gonna stand together with you on the 20th of June.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, well, the situation is that they are really stuck in it.
Yeah.
Like it's not very solvable. The only thing is that really like we need radical change in how institutional racism is like banned, and like like we really need like big changes for these situations to be solved. So that's why it's always difficult to say like, okay, we need this, we need that. Yeah, of course they need food, they need a bed, they need a shower, they need clothes, like all these kind of practical things. But this is not actually what is needed. What is needed is that we stop the fact that this asylum policies are very violent, extremely violent, and makes yeah, like damages people to such a big extent, and that we should not allow that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I just want to mention before we leave that Elke, you also have a project, this We Sell Reality project that we're also going to share in the chat as well, so people can have a look at it. Thank you so much, Alhady and Elke, for joining us. We'll be there standing with you, and we will also remember that you are here and not put you in the back of our minds. I think that's also really important, this kind of visibility, and to keep talking about these issues until these policies change and until these laws can change, so people are not stuck in this limbo situation just based on these legal structures that are in place.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, thank
Bye.
you. So I'm going to actually kind of continue in the legal realm for a little bit longer, because in our first session we had Jeremy Bierbach, who joined us to answer questions about the TOZO situation, particularly the impact it would have on non-EU freelance workers. And his specialty is, and focus of interest is invoking norms of international law, EU law in particular, as a source of protection for members of minority groups who are unrepresented or underrepresented in the democratic process, in particular EU citizens, their non-EU citizen family members, and other non-EU citizen immigrants to the Netherlands. So we want to invite Jeremy back again to speak a little bit with us about the rights that non-EU permit holders or those who are illegalized, so asylum permit, people whose asylum permit has been denied, for example, and what, sorry, like their ability to sort of take part in rent strikes or other kinds of movements that might have like a negative impact or jeopardize their status. So wanted to just bring Jeremy in to touch on that a little bit, especially because there has been a lot of talk about rent strikes or people refusing to pay rent. Maybe we can shed a little bit of light on the rights that people have in that regard. So welcome, Jeremy. Oh.
Now I should be,
yes.
Okay.
You're good.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. So yeah, first of all, I mean, I suppose for any migrant, for any non-EU citizen especially, living in the Netherlands, it's sometimes I get a lot, that's a very common question of all times, not just of COVID times, of am I in trouble? Am I going to lose my residence permit because of something I did? And so, you know, I just want to say when it comes to rent strikes and things like that, first and foremost, it's always important to keep in mind the difference between criminal liability and civil liability. You know, criminal liability means you did something that was actually, you know, just a crime, and the state comes down, you know, and the police arrest you, and you go to court and you can be convicted and, you know, sent to jail or sentenced to a fine or something like that. That's, you know, theft, violence, things like that, but also drunk driving. That's like, you know, or getting caught with drugs. Those are actually some common ways that the people unwittingly get a pretty serious criminal record. Those are about the least serious things that you can do to get your residence permit taken away from you. Yeah, and there's also what's called a sliding scale in Dutch immigration law, which is the longer you've been here with a valid residence permit, the more serious your conviction has to be in order to get you kicked out. And by the way, I say conviction, it's not getting arrested. Getting arrested in and of itself doesn't mean you're in trouble. It means you've been accused of a crime. And what you always have to remember if you're a non-EU citizen and you want to, you know, maintain a, you know, unblemished or not too blemished criminal record is never accept guilt, never accept what they're offering you. If they try to, you know, say, here, just sign this and accept your guilt and pay this fine of 200 euros or whatever, refuse. Ask, you know, be sure to go get a criminal lawyer. You resist, say you want a trial, you want to go to court. It's really important before you ever admit guilt with any kind of criminal activity. If you're getting arrested at a demonstration, you know, things like that. Never admit guilt. Never let yourself be intimidated. But also remember that the act of getting arrested by itself, there's nothing wrong with that. It just means you're accused. It means then you have a right to have your guilt or innocence established in the court of law. And then, yeah, let's suppose you do get convicted of something. The more years you've been here, it's what's called the sliding scale of Dutch immigration law, the worse something has to be to actually revoke your residence permit. So it's really only in the first 2 years that you're here that you have to worry about minor stuff. It still has to be a misdrijf. It has to be the more, you know, serious class of crimes, not an overtrading. But in those first 2 years, in something minor like, you know, like getting arrested with a couple of pills in your pocket or getting arrested for drunk driving can be enough to get your residence permit. Other than that, after that, it gets, you know, increasingly bad that your conviction has to be. Generally, it's phrased in terms of the number of months of jail you can get for something. So, you know, if you've been here for a few years, you know, you certainly don't have to worry about something like not following orders. You know, that can be sometimes, you know, that's the kind of trumped up charge that you can usually get if you participate in a demonstration to get arrested. Not following orders, not going where the officer told you to walk. But always insist on your innocence. Make make sure you get a lawyer, make sure you insist on a trial. Things like rent strikes, things like not paying your rent, things like not paying your bills are not criminal offenses. Those are not criminal offenses. Those are private disputes between you and some other individual who you just happen to owe money to. And yes, they can, if you don't pay it, they can send a collector after you, they can send a deurwaarder, they can compel you to pay, they can requisition your bank account, but it's still not a crime. It's not something that gets you kicked out of the country as an immigrant. It's still ultimately just, a private dispute between you and a private individual. And so I suppose that's what I can say to that. Just always, keep in mind the difference between criminal liability, civil liability. I often get people who call me, they're about to become a Dutch citizen and they're, worried about every little thing they did, like minor traffic violations or a fine from the Belastingdienst they got for not paying their VAT on time. None of that matters. I mean, there is a certain sense in the system that you can only be denied Dutch citizenship if you did something really bad. Typically, something that's a misdrive for which you had to pay a fine of over 800 euros, or you got a day in jail, or you got community service. If you did any of that, then you have to wait another 4 years before you can become a Dutch citizen. So that's the only thing to watch out for. Other than that, what did actually come to mind, this is actually slightly outside of my actual expertise. It's not, but it's something that a lot of my clients who live precariously deal with. And I thought I would give some tips, especially, I'm not actually myself a rental lawyer. That's been a private kind of law. So I can't really deal with, actual, disputes that you have with your landlord. I don't have any expertise with that. But what I do have a lot of experience with in my practice with my clients who live precariously is the issue of being registered at an address. This is one of my really most common questions. And of course, especially in a city like Amsterdam, where it's often hard to get a good, legitimate rental contract, registering at a different address other than where you live is kind of a national sport. We have to acknowledge it. But, I won't encourage it. It's always at your own risk because the law says it is obligatory to be registered at the address where you live, and it is obligatory to live at the address where you are registered. There's not supposed to be any disconnect between that. The obligatoriness doesn't really necessarily mean that you can be fined for not, being where you're registered or otherwise. But it just means that you're supposed to know that as far as the government's concerned, where you're registered is where you live. And you have no excuse for not receiving any mail there, or any consequences that happen due to the fact that you're not actually at the address where you live. It's very important that you sign up for a DigiD, your digital signature ID. You can even and be sure to set it up with the app on your smartphone if you can, the DigiD app, because that makes sure it works without having to send a text message to your phone. And log into the government website mijn.overheid.nl. This is the general government website where you can access all of your own personal data. But you can also sign up for something there called Berichtenbox. That's really important. So when you log into mijn.overheid.nl, one of the first questions it asks you is, do you want to receive all your mail electronically from all of these government agencies? And it'll say like Gemeente Amsterdam, Immigratie en Naturalisatiedienst, Belastingdienst, say yes, 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 yes. This means that if you ever, from any of those government agencies, if they ever send you a letter on paper, you'll get it first. You'll get a notification by email that you can log in and identify yourself with your DigiD. So this is really important for people who are living precariously, who are not actually at the address where they're registered, who need to know that, if they're going to get something important from the government that they need to respond to quickly. So that's one major tip. And yeah, and if you're dealing with a situation where you might be losing your leads, you might be kicked out of where you're living, and you might have to be living more casually, just always try to do your best to maintain some registered address and not get kicked out of the registered address where you are. I've heard all the excuses from people's friends when I say to a client, why don't you just ask this friend or you can register, and the friend say, oh, I don't know, I'm worried my taxes will go up. I've heard all the excuses. The only valid excuse that a friend, again, I'm not encouraging this, but if somebody's really your friend and they really want to help you out, they shouldn't have any reason not to give you permission to register their place unless they are receiving benefits. Those are the only kind of people who have a legitimate reason not to have you officially living at their address. Because if they have a need-based benefit, or even potentially if they're retired and they get pension, their benefits can be reduced due to them having a roommate. But people who say like, "Ooh, I'm worried it's going to affect my taxes," no, that's not true. It doesn't affect their income taxes. They're not seen as having a partner just because you live there. So those are some things to. Those are just some tips, maybe outside of my actual field of life, but just from what I've seen and experienced, because one of the things that sometimes things can go very, very wrong if a client, I've seen it in the experience many times. If you get deregistered from somewhere, or if you have a status as being here as someone's partner, which in most cases requires you both to be living at the same address, and they don't watch out, and one of them registers at a different address, and they get into trouble for that. So it's always just very important to keep those things in mind. But yeah, like I said, sign up for DK days to make sure you don't miss any important mail. If you're going to get kicked out, because generally, if you are going to get kicked out of an address where you're registered, you'll usually find out about it first by the gemeente sending you a letter at that address saying, "It's come to our attention, somebody told us you don't live here anymore," something like that. Do you care to respond? The idea is, if you're really living there, you would respond, and then you don't get deregistered. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that nobody, even the landlord, even the master tenant, can't just instantly get you kicked out of an address. They have to report you as gone, and then you have to get a letter notifying you that they've gotten this notification. Do you care to respond? So those are just the tips that I would give to people who live a little more on the edge.
Thank you so much. I know we're running a little bit late, but I have one super quick question. It actually relates to our last session in relation to the TOZO, because there was one thing that was sort of still up in the air, which is whether people who receive the TOZO can also count it towards their income if their visa is based on, the prolongment of their visa is based on income. I was just curious if there was any updates on that since the last time we talked.
That is still up in the air. That is unfortunately still up in the air. We are still waiting for the final, so far there was just a political commitment made by the State Secretary of Security and Justice, or they keep reversing it, Justice and Security, to Parliament. But her policy people at the IND have not yet managed to write the legislation into the policy handbook or say exactly what that will be. So far, we don't know. There was a recent article published about the subject in the immigration law journal, Asiel and Migratierecht, and they made it open access. So I don't know if there's a place where I can, it's in Dutch if anyone wants to read it, but this is sort of an expert opinion on TOZO TOGs. Can it affect your right to stay? It's all about different types of stay. It's well worth a read, but I'm not sure exactly where I can put it in a URL.
If you email it to me, we can get it into the YouTube chat, and then people can read it from there.
Okay, I'll find that right now.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeremy. It's really great to have you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna pass it over now to Koen, who's gonna take over the last sets of conversations. Welcome back, Koen.
Thank you, Margerita, and thank you again, Jeremy, for your most urgent support and solidarity to all the non-EU cultural workers and non-cultural workers, just for everybody. We really need more lawyers like you with all your efforts. Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, we now go over to Tatjana Macic. She is an artist, a writer, researcher, and educator, and a longtime collaborator of Platform BK. She's our beloved colleague. And she's also an expert on the issue of studio and living spaces. She was a member of the KABA and KABA committee and advisor for the Amsterdamse Fonds voor de Kunsten. And Tatjana also has a living space in the Lely. So she's a housemate of Julia. Tatjana will clarify the policy and government model of living spaces and studio spaces in Amsterdam. It's really important for us to understand how this policy is structured, and because this is actually the basis of in most of our living situation. Amsterdam has, in comparison to other cities, a really complex governance model with many parties involved, which makes it hard for the community to work towards self-organization and ownership. We now go over to you, Tatjana, so please help us out to understand in what models we live and work in.
Thank you, Koen, for your introduction. Just a little note. I have a studio space in the Lely and not the living space. Yeah. So what I will do is talk a little bit about the complexities of the Amsterdam art scene. Amsterdam knows a lot of different forms of studio spaces: individual atelier and living space, individual atelier in an atelier building, ateliers in free spaces which were once squatted by artists, studio spaces in the Broodplaatsen, shared spaces in creative hubs, and a few more. The contracts of all these are different, so that's important to know. The shared spaces are on the rise, and they are even becoming smaller and smaller, and all the others are slowly becoming less in numbers and disappearing in various ways. For example, in recent years, more than 120 individual ateliers magically disappeared from the registries of the Amsterdam housing corporations and became what? Commercial spaces, luxury apartments? We just do not know. Questions about these were asked in the Manifest for Affordable Ateliers in Amsterdam, which Platform BK, Kunstenbond, Loods, and many others signed and submitted to the City Council in 2017. It also speaks about an impactful law, Woningwet 2015, which is a housing law, which still has an immense impact on atelier policy today. You can check the manifest on the website of Platform BK. Since 2018, when the Kava Committee was established, for every 68 artists, one atelier was available. Today, even with more Broodplaatsen, the scarcity of the studio spaces grows. And this was, in recent decades, the government has required that artists become entrepreneurs and freelancers, basically. The studio spaces have also become more business spaces and are needed to prove that one is entrepreneur. The city recently announced, just let me check, can you hear me? Otherwise, I'll put my mic on.
We can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. So just to continue, the city recently announced aid for Broodplaatsen, but how much of these funds will come to the benefit of the artists, and how much will it end up in the administrative and managerial structures? In the Amsterdam art world, we are very much used to dealing with quite demanding and yet transparent power and funding structures, where many rules and checks and balances apply for us, the artists, such as Amsterdam Art Fund. In these strange times, sitting in front of the screen, I felt a need to make something physical I can hold on to. So I made these signs as visual representation tools that I'm just going to hold up when I speak about something. So Amsterdam Art Fund, Art Council or Kunstraad, Bureau Broodplaatsen, and partly Kava. We are used to dealing with art councils. Well, that is quite okay and quite logical. In my opinion, we need to match the powerful and aggressive property lobby. And next to the elder woman or city councillor for culture and city property, we should also ask and talk to the city councillor for building and living, city councillor for sustainability and cultural circular economy, the city councillor for finance, city councillor for diversity and immigration, city councillor for education and poverty, because that is how the power flows. It is not concentrated only in art and culture segment in the city. Let's not underestimate the power of the gemeentelijke vastgoed, city property office. I'll come to that just in a moment. According to the city councillor Ture Velani, the art sector makes for 10% of the total city economy. I'm quite curious to know how this calculation is made. Maybe it's even more. However, we are experiencing a particular zeitgeist now, which is manifesting in aggressive takeovers and the loss of social housing and shared communal property. So what is a social property, or maatschappelijke vastgoed in Dutch? Well, maybe we can say that it's a property that belongs to all of us, and we, the people, decide to give it a special artistic, cultural, communal, or some other function, which has another value than purely commercial and economic value. And due to aggressive lobbying on the private and commercial sector, the shared communal property is quickly changing hands and governing forms and ending up in commercial ownership, as we have seen in the case of Loods. So the city intensively sells and rents municipal buildings to entrepreneurs and other organizations. And in that process, the studio spaces are becoming more expensive or totally disappearing. And due to this intense and multifold lobbying power, power is therefore in the hands of property owners, such as housing corporations, property managers, such as Urban Resort, which today has more than 19 or exactly 19 out of 60 or so buildings in the city, private owners even, and the city government, which is that I mentioned before, which all results in unaffordable studio spaces for artists. We're dealing with fragmented and quite opaque structures here in Amsterdam, while we as artists are asked when we are submitting a project or we want to do something with the public funding to be quite transparent. The fragmentation of the art and culture studio and living spaces in Amsterdam is even more obvious today during the COVID pandemic. It leads to an undemocratic processes that are connected to property ownership and lack of self-governance opportunities. What needs to be changed is a lot in the policy in Amsterdam. It's quite opaque, and there are all these different, I don't know, I can make even more, all these different players here, but we need to create a transparency about the systemic governmental power structures, funding, lobbying, and laws and regulations which have a different impact on the art world and direct impact on the art world, namely the studio and living spaces in Amsterdam. This includes the advice Kava is giving, the committee Kava that came up in conversations before. For example, is the current price for square meter for studio spaces, which is approaching 60 euros, still affordable? Also, the contracts that artists are forced to sign for studio spaces should be considered by Kava, not only in price, but also in duration of the contract and relation to the square meter price versus the service costs, because the service costs sometimes become even bigger than the actual costs, the rental costs. The short-term contracts are leading to musical chair dance, which is destroying or hindering so many artistic practices. Also, the systemic underrepresentation of artists in general and of artists of diverse backgrounds in particular in these public structures needs to be changed. We are underrepresented. In other words, the city government should talk with us, not just about us or just to us. A recent example is the talks at aid package for the Broodplaatsen, which has started with good intentions, I'm sure, but without any artist representatives. We need more buildings which artists can self-govern in the properties owned by the municipality, not only rundown buildings that nobody else even wants, that city offers to artists, or buildings for the purpose of gentrification. We need more buildings which artists can self-govern so we can have more durable and meaningful impact. That's my cue. Meaningful impact on the city and become the co-creators of the city, not only passengers and renters. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tatjana, for this amazing talk and explanation you give us. I hope we can publish maybe your with your text on maybe later, so everybody can read it, because it's so much very insightful information we should all use in order to create more leverage against the powerful vastgoed lobby you call. And yeah, our next guest is Abel Heijkamp, and I hope he can talk with us about this, what we can do as a bottom-up organization. Abel is a documentary filmmaker from Den Bosch, and he's an active member of Bond Precaire Woonvormen. Bond Precaire Woonvormen fights for rights of people who live in temporary and precarious and often way too expensive situations. Abel is also an expert of bottom-up organization, what we as a collective could do to fight for our rights, and what we could do if we have disputes with our landlord. Should we all go on a rent strike? What can we do to create leverage to municipalities? So Abel, please tell us about your organization and what you do in that organization, and what we as a community of tenants can do to change our precarious situation. You have to unmute yourself.
Hello. Do you hear me clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I graduated as a sculptor, but now I'm more involved in research and activism, and especially housing activism. We started the union in 2010, since we saw the flexibilization of housing and the marketization of housing is really on a rapidly increasing. And yeah, it started with the ban on squatting. That was a very clear marking point. And yeah, now we try to organize different groups that suffer from precarious housing that can be either unsafe or in a lot of times too expensive or temporary. And yeah, one of the questions was how the crisis is being used as a way to increase rents. Like even in this Corona work and housing crisis, the Minister of Housing increased the yearly rent. They just announced that by the 1st of July, lots of rents are rising even up to 6.6%. And also there was not really a ban on evictions in this country. There were only intentions with landlords. So what Corona really teaches us is who deserves protection and who not. And this was already clear. And yeah, I think artists are always on the forefront of precarity, but yeah, the under organization aspect is really problematic, but it's quite hopeful to see that so many people are organizing from below. But often it's quite defensive. They react to what landlords do or say, and yeah, our union can help to boost those voices and to fight for existential security for all, and to start off with housing, because that's the most precious thing, where you experience a lot of civil rights from. And in that way, like the workspaces of artists, they are precarious, but their housing is also precarious. And that interconnection is really problematic if those two main pillars for your existence are unstable. You cannot really function autonomously or good in your life. So basically, we just wrote a toolkit for housing security, and it's called first the food, then the rent, and it has 3 solutions. The main problems are either income, too expensive rents, or evictions because of one of the almost 20 types of temporary contracts. So it's not easy to generalize like the position of the artist or the cultural worker. the problem is there are so many contracts and so many typical situations that you need customized, customized campaigns to fight back. But you also need a structure, to plea for different politics, because in the end it's a political choice to leave people in insecurity, and that's a systemic problem. But that starts with people writing and publishing and taking a say about these unfair practices. We get contacted all over the Netherlands with people with housing problems. We are not a charity, but a solidarity organization. So we can support people with our network and knowledge, but we also ask them to support us. And now there is in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and The Hague, and soon also in my town, we will start a local group of the union. To make this resistance against an unfair system more sustainable, because you cannot win this battle in a short term or in 1 hour alone. There needs to be more of a collective effort. And for the too expensive rents that were, I heard that problem quite some time. You can do a rent strike. That's a possibility. You can also legally complain against too high rents, but that has very few chances of achieving something because it's a political problem. But the two main options are: you can stop paying the rent increase by the 1st of July and join a national campaign, or you can do a rent strike with the people who can't pay, because we think rent increases in times of Corona are totally stupid. And also to say payment plans are some kind of measurement work that only leads to a mountain of debt. So that puts people on the poverty line. We think we need rent cancellation and lowering the rent. So when you sign for a payment plan, you throw in your own windows, and lots of people, was mentioned before, you are not a criminal when you don't pay the rent or you don't leave your house. That's a civil matter, but not of a criminal matter. And obviously, in times of Corona, the state says they will evict less people. And the courts were less active, but they are starting up. And we developed a solidarity network method. So basically, you can make a local group, put pressure with social media, get our union and neighbors behind it, get a lawyer behind it, ask local politicians to raise your demands, and this increases the chances to win, and also it lowers the chances of risk and intimidation. And you can actually use the intimidations landlords use against individual tenants to put them up against themselves by just making it public, because all of this misery, it functions very well in an individualized society where people start to believe they are consumers of housing. The idea of solidarity can give direct results for that. If people want to know more, we made an English brochure how to claim your housing rights. That's in English, and we just made a toolkit for how to get housing security. That one is in Dutch, but maybe with some Google translating you can can get along, and you can always ask us questions. So also, when your contract in temporary rent is about to be terminated, you can contact us, and we have several methods to block the eviction. There's no success guarantee, but as one speaker of the Kai already mentioned, we are with more than they are, and let's use the power you have, and for a good cause. And housing is a right, and it's not some kind of favor. And it looks like some parties and people forgot about that, and I think it's about time to give them a reminder.
Thank you, Abel. We really need this information to self-organize, and we will publish your text, so the toolkit and also the other texts you mentioned, the brochure you have in English. And if people need translation with anything, they can always reach out to us, I imagine, also to me. Okay, we have little time left, so I quickly go forward with our last section of the evening, which is all about self-owned practices. And I go over to Tatjana, who will introduce us to this section.
Thank you, Koen. So as you said, so far we heard about the precarious and temporary spaces. And in this segment, we want to talk a little bit about some examples of artists which are self-organizing spaces and which are more sustainable and dealing with different problems. And we also have a valuable contribution we can learn from outside of Amsterdam. So I would like to introduce to all of you Karlien van Leeuwen. She's a designer, owner of the studio Smeerolie, social connector, graduated at the Ritvol Academy, and she's a member of the board of a Domijn. Just a short introduction of a Domijn. It's a creative land property for artists and creatives from different disciplines who collectively occupied it in the 80s, then leased it from the government. And nowadays, artists and designers own the property, which they bought in 2014 from the city of Weesp, thanks to the loan from Triodos Bank and a huge own investment. So welcome, Karlien. It's nice that you're here, and I'll start with the first, with the basic question, actually. This is an amazing example that you guys are doing. What does ownership of this property and self-management mean in practice?
Well, thank you for inviting us. Short correction, we didn't buy the property from the municipality of Weesp. They were our competitor with for buying the property. We bought it from the state, actually. So back to your question, what does this ownership change the way we organize ourselves? Well, a lot has changed and in the last 30 years, and we had to reinvent ourselves a couple of times, actually. As you mentioned, we first squatted the place about 30 years ago. You can imagine that you have a different attitude of maintenance of buildings if you don't know how long you can stay there. For instance, and an end of showing yourself is also different if you're squatting than if you're renting, so to say, legally. But after this squatting period, we legally, how do you call it? Became leaseholders of the property. So we had to maintain the property also a bit and make sure that we used it in a nice way and we communicated with the area around us. So we were not an island on ourselves. And that even became more and more, we had to stress that factor a lot. to make the buying of the property possible. And we changed the way we were organized as well. So when we first we squatted it, we all owned the properties, sort of, not really, but sort of. It started as a foundation, then it became an association, and with buying it, or a little bit before we bought it, it became a cooperation. And this cooperation means that we brought all of our forces together and stood stronger as a more serious party to be able to buy it as well. And not only because we were standing strong together, but also we had a lot of how do you call it? People around us, which we can ask to help us with buying the property, because there were a lot of difficulties on the way of doing that.
Yeah, we had a conversation today, and it was quite enlightening about your struggles, how many years it took you, and how much hardship to actually make a domain what it is today, to be self-managed. And you also manage everything on the property, right? You maintain it as well. You operate as a group. You do you have a lot of committees that deal with all kinds of stuff that other artists who are in Broedplaats actually don't have to do.
Well, I don't know if that's true, because I was in a couple of Broedplaats in Amsterdam before I could join the Domijn. And they always asked of the people who wanted to be in the Broedplaats in Amsterdam, the ones that I was in, to also participate a lot for the community, to make a connection with the neighborhood, and to spend a lot of free time and energy in making this connection. And I think it's really great if you can make this connection and you're not an island on yourself with your Broedplaats. But the difficulty in that I found was that you put a lot of energy and a lot of time in making all these connections, and getting people to find you, and you to finding other people, and connecting them to each other, and having great events together. But then you have to get out again, because it's also temporarily, and you usually lose these connections because you don't know where you're going next. And that is the really great thing, I think, about a place where you can actually stay. That's all the investments that you do together and organize together are for the long term. So the difference is also that now we don't have to think about the next year or the next 2 years, but we can make a plan for the next 30 years. And that's so, that gives so much breadth, and at the same time, so much responsibility, which we are facing now as well. We have to gain a bit more awareness within our own group, that we're not just maintaining this property for us at this moment, and that we're really lucky to have this space, but that we want to maintain it for generations in the future. And to do that, we have to stay in touch with people around us, and different creative events in Weesp, and but also in Amsterdam, because we're actually part of Amsterdam now. So it takes it's almost a day job for like 5 people to organize this. Also the renovation of the buildings, and there comes a lot more to it than you would think initially.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's really amazing to have this perspective of 30 years. I mean, it's incredible just to have this longevity. And hearing what people were saying today really breaks your heart when you see people being evicted, or don't know where to go next. Like I mean, that's so difficult, and you're in a very special position, but you also fought for it very long, and it's a very difficult battle as well for all of you to maintain it. I really think there are a lot of people if artists want to learn how to start new buildings, they could go to you, I hope, and get some experience on first hand from you guys. Because you are such a shining and good example for all of us. I mean, there are other spaces as well in Amsterdam, like Teterode and others who also self-managing. But this is, we would like to learn from all of you. How do you do this? I mean, it takes so much courage, knowing what kind of troubles you can go through and how difficult it is.
Yeah. I can sum up some of the difficulties, maybe, not to, or some tips to that might help. But
Please do.
Yeah, so it was a very difficult and complex process, which was led by not one person, but more persons, of course. But one person made her day job to get here, Irene Lesparre. She was the chairman of the board of the Domijn, they made plans of the area. They studied regional plans of the structural view of the area, and came up with their own views that would fit into that. Under their own conditions, write a plan of vision, and make use of the network that you have. Of course, a very broad network. The Domijn organized a symposium as well on how to achieve this vision and this plan, and they made use of they were ignored a lot of times by the municipality of Weesp, which had different plans for the area, which were not really transparent, which they found out. We found out really late in the process, actually. But by organizing a symposium and inviting people from the municipality of Weesp, making use of the right to speak up and to be heard, and being transparent about every decision that is made on this area or this building that you're working in. Maintain an archive of all the decisions, communicate them to other parties that you're that you're depending on or want to work together with. Ask for professional help, and invite experts. Show yourself a lot, make yourself visible, and invite important relations like the mayor of the city, or even the minister of culture. We invited her, it was Heidi Dancona a long time ago, to attend a theater show, and she came, but she was ignored by the municipality of Weesp. But at least, those are a couple of things that you have to do, and keep short lines with everybody that can help you, and keep on communicating. So I think those are the best tips. But of course, if people have questions, let us know. And we don't know if we have the answer, because for us, we were also actually quite lucky to gain this. And our chairwoman worked super hard to and all the others, of course, to get this, to achieve this. And we're still very grateful. But we would like to help others if we can, of course.
That's really great. I think it's great that you have this experience and that you want to share with others. And thank you for all the great advice. I think it's amazing. I would like to know more about this, and I think that there are many others who would like to know more. So what you said, that it's kind of a lot to go through. That they can have a vision, maybe, or just be inspired to start making plans for new buildings in Amsterdam. I think that would be really great because we really miss that. Thank you so much, Karlien. Thank you. I would like to give word to Koen again, who will read out a statement from another space, which is also self-managed, a quite new one in Amsterdam called Square 28.
Is my microphone on? Yes, hello everybody again. I read the text on behalf of the initiator of Square 28, namely Gerbrand Burger, who can't be here today due to personal circumstances. So he wrote me a text that I will read out loud to you. My name is Gerbrand Burger. I'm the initiator of Square 28 Cooperative Studio Building Project. About 3.5 years ago, I heard from a friend that the city of Amsterdam was giving out lease contracts, erfpacht, for small businesses at the industrial area called Heining, at the west end of the harbor, bordering on Spaarnwoude. I was finishing the build of my own house in Amsterdam North at the time, and that experience had given me the confidence and interest to start another building project. The idea was to build a studio for myself and maybe one or two others. I had my studio in a leaking and crappy building in Zaandam, owned by BAM construction company, and it's a matter of 1 or 2 years until the building will be demolished, construction for new apartments. Some time passed, waiting for the city to come through with information and a lease proposal, and in that meantime I met Niels Alberts and Jean-Marc Maty, and we decided to join forces. With the three of us, the plans expanded. We signed a lease for a different, bigger building plot on the Heining. How to proceed? Of course, we started to make estimations on the construction cost and talk a lot about what we would want it to be. Lots of browsing online, looking at construction methods, used agricultural sheds, auctions for materials, etc. Then I found myself checking out the website of Cultuur plus Ondernemen, Cultural plus Entrepreneurship, and decided to contact financial advisor Alexander Ramslaar. Shortly after we were having our first meeting, and with his guidance, we set up a financial plan, prepared a request for a bank loan. We had to pay of our own pockets for this advice, but it was very useful and helped a lot to make plans even more concrete. Not only in terms of the building itself, but also in terms of a legal form, exploitation plan, etc. We choose to found a cooperative because A, it reflects on our ideas of owning a building together and work in a small community to some degree. B, it's a very flexible legal form, which allowed us to shape the organization principle in the founding of the document. And C, we needed to behave as one legal entity towards the city. The bank required that we raise at least 25% of the total investments ourselves. We realized this by finding investors. At first I thought this would be very difficult, but although it took time, we succeeded without too much trouble, by talking a lot to people about the project. After some family members came through, others started to show interest. And considering that our final construction budget is almost 850,000 we did very well. I think the most important thing is to have a plan worked out, to be realistic about it, and to be able to answer the question you get about it. Another security from the bank was a list of people who had signed for their intention to become a member of the cooperative once the building was realized. And this was very helpful, although only a couple of people who signed actually became a member in the end. Jean-Marc, Niels, and myself are all experienced builders, so after all the preparation, risk-taking, and the insecurity of the financial and administrative part of our project was kind of sorted, once we could start preparing and realizing the actual construction, it felt like a relief. As construction prices were rising while we were asking quotes from different companies, We were very happy to have found one that could build a Casco building within our budget. Last summer they started, and immediately the delays started to pile up. This seems to be standard procedure in construction, but it compromised our planning for building the interior walls, installation, staircase, cargo lift, floor heating, solar panels, everything, all of which we would do ourselves. So we started working on the interior before the outer shell of the building was finished. We were standing in the mud for a lack of a floor and in the cold wind because there were no windows or doors. Long story short, last February everybody moved in, 1 month late, with electricity, running waters, and one of the toilets working. We started with a plan for a basic shed with studios for the three of us and ended up with a 2-story building with 13 large studios. When I write about like this, it all seems quite easy. But of course, there were all kinds of hurdles and moments we thought it might not happen after all. And we are always said to each other, if this is really not possible, we quit. But as long as we suspect there is a way, we continue. Until we were passing the point of no return, which was basically when we signed with the construction company. It was a bit scary, but also very energizing. And now we are very happy and proud with a newly formed community in our own building forever. This is a very short version of our story. If you have any question, don't hesitate to send me an email at mail@gerbrandburger.nl. Thanks for listening, and sorry I couldn't be online myself. Postscriptum, we still have one studio available of 90 square meters on the first floor, and I'm myself looking for someone to share my 150 square meter studio on the ground floor. If you're interested, please let me know. That was it. One of the few very inspiring stories, but this is a new project. So it is possible to create a self-owned building in the city and rent it out for really cheap prices. Yeah, we will share the email of Gerbrand in the comments, so you can all send questions to him.
Oh, thank you, Koen. This was really so inspiring to see how this process is actually different for each building, actually. I would like to give a short introduction to our next and final speaker of tonight. Last but not least, and that's Remco Osorio Lobato, who is an artist. So he's our colleague and has an experience in architecture and property sectors. He studied art at the Royal Academy in The Hague, where he also lives. For the last 3 years, he has been responsible for the policy in the city of The Hague regarding ateliers and bloedplaatsen, which is actually situated at the Stroom, which is comparable to Amsterdam Art Fund, but is also quite different, I would say. Remco knows more about it. And Remco also knows the art world in The Hague quite well. So you have been listening a lot, you know a lot about the situation in The Hague. Can you maybe, to start, quite difficult task, but can you sum up the atelier and bloedplaatsen policy in The Hague for us, Remco?
Yeah, that is not a short description, but just brief on Stroom. So my task at Stroom is studio policy. That's one thing that's embedded within the organization. As an extension of the municipality, it's our task to write and influence the policy on studios. Mm-hmm. And second is that I'm part of the Bloedplaatsen overleg. So that is a municipal body where decisions on bloedplaatsenbeleid or policy are being made. So it's actually two branches that form my task within Stroom. And Stroom is not a management organization. We don't own any properties. We do not manage any properties. We just are there to influence the policy and to lobby and to mediate between the art world and the municipality or property owners. Mm. So that's brief. I think, and I knew this because I'm in touch with all my colleagues within the Netherlands. on a quarterly base, and I'm always so surprised how much it differs per city and municipality. It does not only differ per situation within one municipality, but nationwide. There's just not one line, and The Hague is different in many ways. And I've been listening to all the participants tonight, and I think a very important element, and we're feeling it as well, is the political element. So political representation is really the key. And when I came working at Stroom 3 years ago, I stepped into a very beneficial political climate. The Haagse Stadspartij, which is a local party on the left side of the spectrum, had the alderman for culture and real estate, which was actually a key to improve a proper policy. Let me give you a rundown on how things are situated in The Hague. Of course, Corona is hitting The Hague just as everywhere else. As far as I'm concerned, it is revealing a situation in which artists live in a very explicit way. I hope that it will be an opportunity and be taken as an opportunity to change certain things. But I will have a little comment on that towards the end. But that said, I think we are quite or relatively okay. Let me knock on wood. Is that first of all, in The Hague, most buildings, just as in Amsterdam, are municipal owned. But in our case, that means they have €0 book value. That means it's a very cheap situation for the municipality that allows them to be kinder in current situation, which also allowed us a few years before I started working at Stroom to fix the square meter price on €35 per square meters per year. And this hasn't been influenced by indexation, so it doesn't change. It's a fixed amount throughout, unless there's a political change, of course. We do not work with management organizations, so there's no overhead or profit to be made. That means that artist initiatives are able to manage the buildings themselves, and with Stroom being in between, we try to advocate the core business of the artist, which means there's no counter compensation asked from the artist. The core value and the core goal for running a building is to do what they do, and that's make art. That means that sometimes a building looks messy and is not a very good PR machine, a tool for municipalities and project developers and housing corporations to work with. But we try to be a pit bull in that, because once you go down that road, you lose track of the situation, and other costs comes into place, because every investment have to be paid back. So we try to work with small budgets, which sounds contrary to what some people think is necessary to make things work. So we don't go for professionalization or marketing tricks. What we try to do is how can you do things as efficient as possible. So we work with small budgets. I know Lely had, I think, 1.3 million for 3 years. In Amsterdam, we work with a yearly budget now of €250,000 for all the Broekplaatsen. Just to give you an idea, and yet we have about 18 Broekplaatsen right now, and Broekplaatsen means something completely different in The Hague. I have to say that our policy is demand-driven. So what that means is an artist initiative or collective will come to Stroom We have an introduction. We go over the wishes and the ideas and the dreams of this initiative. And then we take it apart and we try to be advocate of the devil and see what are the loose ends, how can we improve it and speak the language of the players that you're going to face. So how do you have a unilateral story that you can bring forward and convince the municipality that you bring value to the city? And I don't mean being a social worker or a food provider for problem areas, but making art, and art is a value. We try not to instrumentalize artist or art. So like I said, demand driven, that means we will not come with a building and a concept up front and try to find tenants to fit it. But it's the other way around. It keeps things a lot clearer. It keeps things a lot easier to maintain in that sense. Okay, that said, also to mention that we tried not to work unless it is beneficial to the initiative. We try not to work with temporary buildings. So we have permanent situations or semi-permanent where at least an investment can be done without having to worry about a lost work. So we have a minimum of 5 years when we engage in a project. The budget of 250,000 is not necessarily there only to, and that's a municipal budget. It's not only there to finance the bricks. There's a chunk that they can use to build, but there's also, we are setting up a structure now where we have a pool of experts that can advise, because so far everything has been gone through Strom. So we advise, we mentor, we mediate, we lobby, etc. And I think it's much more sustainable, and luckily the municipality has exactly the same vision, that this is being shared over a pool of experts that can guarantee this kind of guidance for initiatives. It sounds like everything is set in stone, but like I said, there's a lot of influence by politics. So we had a change of organization in the municipal structures, and that means you have to start from scratch. You have to build relationships. Very much like what Karlien said, that you have to do your own PR. You have to voice. You have to represent and tell your story over and over and over and over again. I see a lot of benefits from owning a building. We have 2 examples in The Hague, Maakhaven and Besturing. But I also see the amount of work that it takes, and it takes away from running your art practice. So we advise artists up front and tell them, so they know what is to be expected. It's a choice that you have to make, because it's a job. In that sense, I think it's also good, not because I see how municipalities are using the idea of ownership also as a way to take their own hands off it. And I want to press on the importance of social real estate of the municipality, because it's a valuable tool for the municipality, but also artists to influence our cities to be better cities. And
Remco, I just want to draw a little parallel between The Hague and Amsterdam. Like when you mentioned the price of 35 euros per square meters, I think many artists in Amsterdam would say, "Wow, that's incredible." But we maybe also forget in 2008 that was the even lower, the beginning price here when the Cava started. it also included service costs.
Yeah.
Service costs were thrown out later. So in just a little bit longer than a decade, Amsterdam has changed its policy so much. It's incredible. Broedplaats also really drives the forces here more than we sometimes realize. But it's what you understand with Broedplaats. What is it actually that you understand when you said it's different than Amsterdam?
Yeah, well, this is a battle we had to fight because Broedplaats. I have a background in concept development, so I used to work a lot with project developers as well. And Broedplaats has been hijacked. The word creative hub. There's a lot being written about it. Where artists are being instrumentalized to have other goals. What we have established is that so far, Broedplaats means a space for experimentation and collaboration on the arts, in the arts, and is in fact not even related necessarily to a physical space. So there are artist initiatives that are online. They are being called Broedplaats as well. So this is it's a recent step that we are able to take, but it's important because we feel very strongly about the fact that The Hague is very much artist initiative driven. It's what has been the strength of the Hague art world, I think.
Yeah, I think I think many artists can very easily come to you and say, we're a group of artists, we are a group of friends, we need space. I've seen it many times. I just say, go to Remco, talk to him, and they are like, oh, amazing, there's one person we can talk to. Here in Amsterdam, we don't have one person. We have like just this very fragmented system, which kind of makes it impossible to maintain your dream of having a building.
I'm glad you said that, because that makes it exactly very precarious. And this is my worry for the future a little bit. If it falls on the shoulders of Stroom, or even the relationship that you have with certain figures within the municipality, it's very fragile. It does not allow you to slack. You need to be alert, and because of that, and Corona luckily has created a situation where there's an opening to it. Is that we are trying to organize the initiatives, and what we have done at the beginning of the Corona situation is we have been monitoring every Broedplaats. So we have been talking. How are you doing? What are you facing? Can you give me an idea and rundown of the issues? And we have been documenting this. So we have a file on each location, and we have been talking to the municipality about this. That's step one. The second thing is that we try to organize the artist initiatives, and they are now basically doing the same work. That means they are meeting, they are voicing, and they invited the alderman for culture to have a conversation. And actually tomorrow there will be the first meeting. And my opinion is that is the only way to go forward, is that organizations such as mine of Stroom are unnecessary on this field, because as far as I'm concerned, we are symptoombestrijding. What's the word in English?
Fighting the
symptom relief, right? So it is just a means, because the situation is fucked up. Sorry for my French, but the fact that artists are being instrumentalized and not being paid for the work that they're doing. The fact that the situation is so much precarious also in terms of time. Do you have time to organize? Do you have time to unite? And I think Corona, and I heard Julia say about how it finally creates time to form a community.
Yeah.
I see the same in The Hague, that I think this is an opportunity to become a union, every city, and maybe even on a national level, because so many people have been talking about what art should be, what artists need, but the artist voice self is very much unheard, and that's not because they are not opinionated or that they don't feel the pressure, but it's because they're freaking working their head off to stay afloat and to prove that they are valuable. And something that I realized from my previous practice is that artists are being valued, but it's not being said explicitly. Yeah. So whenever it's convenient, you're being put in an area to sit and look pretty, or to improve the area, or to be social workers, whatever. We all know the cases, and once it's not necessary, then you're being tossed around. And to realize the value that you have, and to step up, and to refuse free work, to debate, and to represent yourself, and what Karlien said, invite the politics to come to you and be an equal partner, because you are. It's very important to know that, because I've seen artists being too modest in a sense.
Oh, Remco, I think this your talk inspires a lot of people, especially here in Amsterdam, where we are struggling a lot. We are struggling really, and we are fragmented as a sector as well. I'm sorry to cut your talk short. I mean, we are like a half an hour over the time. But I would like to thank you, and thank all our speakers. Karlien, thank you so much for sharing. Sepp, thank you for reading out. And Remco, we'll just continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
So I'll give the word to Nadia and Margerita to round up, to give us a little bow at the end.
Thank you so much, Tatjana.
Thank you.
We were all in the Zoom, we were all like nodding our heads as Remco was talking, because so much of it really resonates. I think it's also, it feels also like a very hopeful ending, because we're looking at all these different structures that we can learn from and move forward with. So because we're running like 30 minutes over, we're gonna skip away from the question and answer period, but there's so many links in the YouTube chat. So for all of you who are going to be watching later on, maybe watching in the future, you can use all of those links to ask questions and reach out to the right people. So one thing I want to mention before we all go is that we are already planning the next Solidarity session, which is going to be done together with Tent and Showroom Mama in Rotterdam. And they're going to focus a little bit more on the situation in Rotterdam, but also really expand out to this idea of breaking open the idea of the cultural worker, because it is actually quite a limited category that doesn't include so many of the people that actually work within cultural institutions, like cleaners, for example, or security guards. And so they're going to talk about that, as well as how things are like in Rotterdam. And we'll share that information as soon as we have it. So we're really excited to kind of continue these sessions, but also with new people and in a new space. Big thanks to the team of artists of the W139, Chunhan Chang, Dave Franz, Thorsten Graal, Bert Jacobs, Petra Ponte, and Nel-Marie de Perez. Thank you for dealing with all the sound issues and staying with us for all this time. And as I said before, there's only 10 more days left for you to see the market exhibition. So I highly recommend it. I was there a few days ago, and it was really beautiful to see it in real life. And thank you again to all of our speakers, to Ehsam, Julia, Sjoerd, Andrea, and all the tenants of WOW, to Alhady and Elke, and Jeremy and Tatjana, Abel, Gerbrand, and everyone from Square 28 who were there through the letter, Karlien, sorry, and finally Remco. Thank you so much. And to Sepp and Koen and Nadia, who are also such a big part of organizing this, and to the audience who joined us, and some of you stayed with us all the way to the end. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We look forward to seeing you again for the next Solidarity sessions. Bye.